All right, good morning. My name is Dan Friedman. I'm a data center technical solutions architect, or technically, my title was uh, renamed to solutions engineer recently. Same role, same purpose. I support partners in the Pacific Southwest of the United States now, as well as a national partner. And I put together this presentation to go over Cisco Compute HyperConverged with Nutanix. It's a presentation that's suitable for business and technical audiences. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, I spent about 2 weeks going through an internal Nutanix bootcamp, trying to consolidate the best, most critical information from all of the presentations I saw, into this one. I had no prior exposure to Nutanix, so if you're similar to me in that way, then you might find this particularly helpful. But pretty much everyone is new to this Cisco Compute HyperConverged with Nutanix partnership and solution. So if that's the case, you'll also find this useful. This slide here is sort of standard fare. Basically says, certain pieces of this presentation may include roadmap information that is subject to change without notice. Features in hardware and software often driven by customer demands. Sometimes those demands change, sometimes dates slip. So, take all of the dates that you see here with a grain of salt, but it should give you a good idea about what our business unit is thinking. And remember that you also are subject to NDA. Okay, so from an agenda perspective, we're going to talk about Cisco's hyper-converged infrastructure strategy and the recent HyperFlex announcement around end of sale, end of life. We'll then move on to discuss the partner opportunity and profitability. We'll then discuss hyper-converged versus infrastructure versus converged infrastructure. And really, we're not going to focus on the versus converged infrastructure portion. So when we get to these slides, there's basically 4 slides. The first 2 cover hyperconverged infrastructure, and the second 2 cover converged infrastructure. And I've hidden the second 2 slides, mainly because in this presentation, since we're discussing Cisco Compute hyperconverged with Nutanix, which is a hyperconverged infrastructure solution, we want to focus the discussion on HCI. But I will provide the CI slides around pros and cons and workload use cases for converged infrastructure should your customer be entertaining a converged infrastructure solution either as a replacement to HyperFlex instead of migrating to the new Nutanix solution. So after we've covered those pros and cons and workloads, then we'll move into the Nutanix solution components. We'll discuss migration strategies and a bit of roadmap, and then I'll present a single slide around ordering process. This is just meant to get you familiar with high-level SKUs and what's expected when you order. I'm also providing links to additional documents that can help you. And then finally, additional resources that you can consume to further educate yourself or obtain help if you need it. All right, so hopefully by now you're already aware that on August 28th of this year, Cisco announced a new partnership with Nutanix, and shortly after that, we announced end of life for HyperFlex. The overall thought behind this announcement was to bring together the best-in-class compute solution with UCS and the best-in-class software solution with Nutanix to create an entire hyper-converged infrastructure solution, net new, that is managed by Intersight. So Nutanix already has its own set of management tools. So the goal of Intersight is not to replace those management tools. They're very robust. The goal of Intersight here is to provide daily operations capabilities that streamline things for operators. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a future slide. So why did Cisco make these announcements, and what is Cisco's position or strategy when it comes to hyperconverged infrastructure as a whole? Well, as it says here on the slide, hyperconverged infrastructure is a growing market with compound annual growth rate of 15% over the next several years. And while Cisco had a competitive product in HyperFlex, it really only carried a small percentage of the overall HCI market. So, given Cisco's other products and the size of our HyperFlex team, we were just unable to keep pace with Nutanix innovation to date. And looking forward into this growth market, we felt that this problem was only going to become more challenging. So, as a result, Cisco decided to instead form a partnership with another market leader in the HCI space, that, of course, being Nutanix. What this allows us to do is it allows Cisco to focus on what we do best and to reinvest into those core strengths. So the money that was previously going to fund the HyperFlex team and the development of that product is now being reinvested into our core strengths. In the meantime, we have this new partnership with Nutanix, who is a leader in this market space, and we can both benefit from that relationship along with our customers. The focus of the joint solution is primarily around UCS hardware with Nutanix software, but it also includes ACI for network connectivity, keeping in mind that ACI already has some integration capability with Nutanix today, and it also includes Intersight for management, as I've already mentioned. Now, the call to action for the Cisco partners that I support is basically as follows. First, and most importantly, we want to care for our HyperFlex customers. And what that means depends on where the HyperFlex customer is in their life cycle of the HyperFlex solution, meaning customers may have M4, M5, or M6 HyperFlex customers today. M4 being the older solutions or oldest solutions still in support, and M6 being the newest solutions. So, regardless, we want to care for all customers. We want to understand what their goals are, what their business use cases are, and their business drivers are, because that understanding is going to help determine appropriate future action, whether that be ride out the existing investment on HyperFlex for as long as possible, and we'll talk about dates on the next slide, or whether that be potentially migrating to Cisco Compute HyperConverged with Nutanix, the new HyperConverged infrastructure solution, or whether that be moving to a converged infrastructure platform or some other solution, maybe that's cloud-based. Regardless, we want to care for our customers. Next, we want to obtain feedback from both partners and customers on the new Cisco Compute HyperConverged with Nutanix solution. And finally, where it's appropriate, when it's appropriate, we want to work to transition the existing install base of HyperFlex customers to Cisco Compute HyperConverged with Nutanix. So as a result of this partnership, HyperFlex was announced end of life on September 12th of this calendar year, and there's some critical dates that you should be aware of that are shown on red in this slide, in red on this slide. So the first date is the hardware sales for HyperFlex will end on March 12th, calendar year 24. So basically about 3.5, 4 months from now. Software sales for HyperFlex will end on September 11th, 2024. So not quite a full year, about 10 months. And last date of support for HyperFlex software will be on February 28th, 2029. There's other dates that are shown here on this slide, but I'll let you read through those on your own. Just be sure to keep this slide handy for your reference. So now we'll talk a little bit about the partner opportunity and profitability, basically what's in it for you, the Cisco partner. First, deal registration is a huge priority, and there are several points on this slide that talk about this. First is Cisco hunting and teaming. For Nutanix SKUs, the default discount will be set, I think, to 5%, but deal registration is going to make that much more profitable for the partner AM. In addition to that, we have a partner promotion, which is an incremental incentive on hardware to flip a Nutanix deal registration to Cisco deal registration. There's a lot more information available on that if needed. Feel free to reach out and let me know. And then, of course, there's the deals desk, which is available to help support you through the deals process in CCW if and when you need it. Enablement is also another top priority, and there's several avenues to achieve this. So the first being Nutanix University. Partners can access this using their Cisco SSO login. So that's a great resource. And then Black Belt and dCloud are other resources or platforms that you can leverage that you should already be aware of as a Cisco partner. Now, if you're a Cisco partner who was specialized in HyperFlex, then we have additional pricing benefits for you for having made that investment in HyperFlex. We wanted to reward those partners. In addition, all partners can obtain NFR licenses for Nutanix software directly from Nutanix, and standard programs like VIP will still apply. This slide first talks about front-end discounts that apply to account managers at our partners, making them more profitable. I've already mentioned deal registration, but there's also discounts associated with account breakaway and prior HyperFlex specialization that I mentioned. The slide also talks about both partner and customer offers. We want to incentivize partners to learn Cisco's selling process, but we also want to drive interest from our customers in the Cisco Compute HyperConverged with Nutanix solution. From a services opportunities perspective, in particular, we feel that migration services will be important in the coming years. And I phrase it that way again because this really depends on where an existing HyperFlex customer stands in the life cycle of their HyperFlex solution. If they are an M4 customer today, with M4 end of life, or I should say end of support coming very soon, this customer is much more likely to be interested in migration services today versus an M6 customer who might be interested in migration services a few years from now. So that's why I say we feel migration services will be important in the coming years, but exactly when that is depends on your customer's HyperFlex solution lifecycle, point in that lifecycle, along with their business use cases and drivers. And then there are also back-end rebates which benefit the partner company, things like VIP incentives that I already mentioned, as well as our lifecycle incentive program. This is just a quick high-level overview of the quoting and Cisco deal registration process. So starting in the upper left, you've got to create a quick quote inside of CCW, which is a budgeting quote, where the standard discounting on Nutanix software is applied. It says here 0 to 10%. On the previous slide, it said 5%. I'm not sure what that number is, whether it fluctuates or differs across partners. I don't see why it would. If more information is needed there, again, feel free to reach out and let me know. But the idea here is the quick quote provides standard discounting. In order to achieve additional discounting, you'll want to submit that for deal registration in CCW, and that will get routed to the Cisco account manager for approval. And if it's whether it's approved or denied, the partner will be notified. But if it's approved, then you can achieve discounts up to 32%. And down at the bottom of the slide, you'll see additional details on the deal registration and partner order process through CCW. So feel free to read through and understand those details. All right, so here in this section of the presentation, we want to spend some time covering hyper-converged infrastructure. As I mentioned previously, we're not going to cover the versus converged infrastructure in the presentation recording, but there are 2 slides which cover pros and cons of converged infrastructure as well as typical workloads or use cases of converged infrastructure that are available to you when you download the PowerPoint that you can use in conversation with your customer. So the main thing to understand about hyperconverged infrastructure is what I've highlighted here. Hyperconverged infrastructure is a software-defined approach that combines compute, storage, and networking into a single integrated system. Ultimately, this means that all of the components can be managed through a single interface along with several other benefits. right? So what we don't want, and what we think a lot of customers really don't want, is a separate management tool for compute and another one for storage and another one for networking. It would be better and simpler, fewer tools to install, configure, secure, patch, update, maintain over time, along with simplified operations, right? Only having one touch point for configuration or manipulation of the system. So that's the idea. On this slide, we try to cover some of the pros and cons of HCI solutions. From a pros perspective, I already mentioned simplified management. Scalability is also easy because you can just add more nodes to your cluster. If we think about just storage alone, with hyperconverged infrastructure, all the disk is in your compute nodes. So you're not having to power an external storage array. And that's just one example of cost efficiency. With data spread across disks in multiple nodes, you also have built-in data redundancy and protection, which provides high availability to your customers. And also improved performance can be achieved using the latest storage technologies like flash and solid state storage devices. From a cons perspective, the first one mentioned is performance. Kind of ironic given that we just said you could achieve improved performance with an HCI solution. So why do we say there's a performance impact as a con? What this really refers to is if you need absolute peak performance, then you might be better off with a converged infrastructure solution. A lot of smaller businesses are able to achieve very good performance in a hyper-converged infrastructure solution, along with the simplified management and operations that we mentioned. But some workload use cases may require peak performance, and in those use cases, you might be better off with a CI solution. So that's all this performance impact con is meant to communicate. There can also be limited hardware flexibility in a hyper-converged infrastructure solution. I think we saw some of that in the HyperFlex solution that is now end of life. I know that we have additional options in terms of node types and disk drive support in Nutanix. So that doesn't mean that we have ultimate compatibility with everything under Nutanix, but I believe we have a greater flexibility in the Nutanix solution, which I think will be looked on more favorably by both partners and customers. Hyperconverged infrastructure also depends heavily on network for communication and data transport between cluster nodes. So there's a dependency there. And then vendor lock-in is possible simply because migration to another platform can be challenging, right? Especially when you've got to move data off of a cluster and then back onto a cluster. That may be discouraging and sort of result in vendor lock-in. It doesn't really mean you're locked in, it just means migration can be more challenging. All right, and here are some common use cases that hyperconverged infrastructure solutions are typically used to solve for. First, virtualized environments. This is pretty much table stakes today, being able to run VMs and containers on top of the platform. Then remote office, branch office, right? To me, this bleeds right in there with small business. Small branch offices and or companies with small IT staff appreciate the simplified operations of a hyperconverged infrastructure stack. Another common workload or use case is edge computing, where IT resources are placed closer to the source of data or end users. Another use case is test dev environments. These are easily scaled and able to run many VMs in supportive development environments. And then we have VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure. Hyperconverged infrastructure is widely used for hosting virtual desktop infrastructure. It's one of the first early use cases that HCI solutions in general targeted. So this isn't an exhaustive list, but it's a good list of common HCI workloads. The next two slides in the deck I've hidden. So just a reminder, right? Just like the last two slides covered pros and cons and then common workloads for HCI solutions, The next two slides are hidden, and they cover pros and cons and common workloads of CI solutions. So be sure to look for those slides in the downloadable PowerPoint. I've hidden them, and we're not going to cover them here. All right, so now we're going to get into the Nutanix solution components. Remember that Nutanix is a software solution that sits atop hardware. So all of the components that we'll talk about here assume some hardware under the hood. That hardware can either be private cloud hardware or public cloud hardware. So if you look at the bottom layer on this slide, that's where we begin, right? NCI stands for Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure, and this is typically where all customers will start their Nutanix journey. This is Nutanix software running on top of hardware that is on-prem and brings together the storage, network, compute, security, etc. Public cloud providers can provide all of these things, right? They can provide storage and network and compute and security using their own native constructs. So what NC2 does, and that stands for Nutanix Cloud Clusters, is it bridges the gap between on-prem and public cloud. Basically, this is Nutanix software running on top of hardware that is owned by your cloud service provider. Now, in the middle layer, just like in the public cloud platform, you can add various services that you need. You can do the same with Nutanix. So you've got NUS, which I think stands for Nutanix Unified Storage, and this offers file, block, and object storage via protocols like NFS, Fiber Channel, and iSCSI. And then you have NDK, which stands for Nutanix Data Services for Kubernetes, and this basically provides data management for your containers. Then you have NDB, which stands for Nutanix Database Service, and this provides database services for data persistence. And then you've got Project Beacon, and the idea there is to extend a Nutanix platform to open source solutions like Kafka and Elasticsearch and Redis. And you'll notice that there's a dotted lines around NDK and Project Beacon. These are basically roadmap items that should be being delivered in a Nutanix software update that's coming soon. Okay, in the top layer, if your technology stack includes, for example, UCS and VMware and Nutanix and AWS, then customers don't really need or want separate tools for, let's say, cost management. What they want, what they need is a single central set of tools to achieve unified management over the entire environment. And at the highest level, that's what Nutanix Central offers. We'll discuss Nutanix management capabilities and products in an upcoming slide. Part of Nutanix management capabilities includes NCM, which stands for Nutanix Cloud Management. This is the part that helps you with your public cloud providers. It also includes LCM, which is Lifecycle Manager. This is where all of your expansion and cluster updates occur. And then you've got NDL. I forget what that stands for, but there's a product cheat sheet coming up in a couple of slides that will clarify that for us. But this is where all of the data governance occurs, things like security and compliance. This is the management component that would handle that. All right, so if we think about the layers that we just saw, the idea of this slide is to communicate the choice that customers have at each one of those layers. So at the bottom, we have the infrastructure, private infrastructure on the left, public infrastructure on the right. Private would consist of Nutanix software running on top of Cisco, HPE, Dell, or Lenovo hardware, and public would consist of Nutanix software running on top of AWS, Azure, or GCP. In terms of the hypervisors, we have support for AHV, which is Nutanix's hypervisor called Acronis, or ESXi, or Hyper-V. Now, Nutanix says please choose either AHV, Acronis, or ESXi. They are not partial to the Hyper-V solution for reasons that I'm not yet aware of. So if you have any questions around that, feel free to reach out. With Nutanix data services for Kubernetes, there are multiple integrations available for running, orchestrating, and managing your containers. These include things like Docker, OpenShift, Rancher, Amazon's EKS, and so on. With Nutanix database services, there are multiple database options available, including Oracle, Postgres, MariaDB, SQL Server, and so on. We've already covered Project Beacon. That's where things like Elasticsearch, Redis, and Kafka come in. So again, choice and flexibility at every layer to suit your customer's specific needs and skill sets is the takeaway message here. Now, this slide is intended to highlight Nutanix's fully distributed architecture, which consists of a number of key tenets, right? So the first one of those is true scale out. With Nutanix's fully distributed architecture, you can achieve scale with consistent performance and capacity. Whether you have 8 or 16 or 32 nodes doesn't really matter. Consistent performance and capacity as you scale. Another key tenet is dynamic data placement. So with Nutanix, they break up the data into very small chunks, 4 megabytes. Most storage systems break up their data into 1 gigabyte chunks. So with much smaller chunks, you can achieve things like data locality, which means placing data closer to users for best performance. There's also a number of optimizations that can be achieved with smaller chunks of data like that. Another key tenet of their fully distributed architecture is that it be efficient and simple. So it offers features like compression and dedupe and erasure encoding. A major goal of efficiency and simplicity is to reduce the total cost of ownership of the solution. They want all of the solution components working harmoniously together. It should provide non-disruptive operations and no impact of availability to customers that have purchased the solution. So all of these things are ways in which Nutanix aims to make their solution efficient and simple. And then resilient and protected data, right? So Nutanix never wants to compromise on write efficiency, even in failure conditions. So you can have resilience at the hardware, node, data, VM, site, and cloud levels. Local resilience, from that perspective, you can use things like snapshots, erasure encoding, and tunable replication factors. For geographical resilience, you can use things like snapshots, data replication, data backup, and data archival. So the entire system is designed for scale, resiliency, and efficiency. And the architecture has evolved over the last 5 years to achieve those goals. Initially, the primary use case of Nutanix was virtual desktop infrastructure, but today, lots of databases and business critical applications run on top of this platform. In fact, Nutanix says that 80% of its customers are running their databases on Nutanix platforms today. Okay, so this here is the product cheat sheet. I've already explained the first 2 sections. We've got the Nutanix base components of Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure or Nutanix Cloud Clusters. These both support hardware either in private cloud with NCI or public cloud with NC2 with Nutanix software running on top. Then we have the Nutanix data components of unified storage, database services, and data services for Kubernetes, along with Project Beacon, all of which we have already discussed. I've provided a few extra notes here on the right, but we will spend some time talking about Nutanix management components. So the first one of these is Prism Element, and this is intended for on-premises cluster management, that being a single Nutanix cluster, and this component is free. Then you have the Prism Central software component, and this is also intended for on-prem cluster management, but in this case, multiple Nutanix clusters. The software is still free, And Nutanix likes to illustrate the purpose of Prism Central by saying it's like an availability zone, where an availability zone has multiple data centers within it, right? But in this case, Prism Central has multiple clusters within it, okay? Then you have Nutanix Central, and this is on-prem, still intended for on-prem cluster management, but is a management layer that sits on top of multiple Prism Central instances and is also a SaaS offering. So if you're familiar with UCS Manager and UCS Central, then UCS Central is a manager of managers. It's a manager of multiple UCS managers, each of which manages an individual UCS domain. So in kind with that, Nutanix Central is a manager of managers, that being Prism Central instances. The only difference between UCS Central and Nutanix Central is Nutanix Central is a SaaS-based offering. Okay, we have NCM, which is Nutanix Cloud Management. This is the component that extends management capabilities to your public cloud. It is a paid component that helps with day two ops, self-service, cost analysis, security, and so on. And then NDL stands for Nutanix Data Lens, which I brought up on a previous slide. This is all about data governance, so security, compliance, and so on. And then Lifecycle Manager, we said, is your one-stop shop for planning and deploying and upgrading your Nutanix clusters, handles everything from the hypervisor to the file server to the hardware and so on. And then finally, from like an ordering perspective, we've got bundled components. NCP stands for Nutanix Cloud Platform, but really this is nothing new. This is just a combination of Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure and Nutanix Cloud Management from a purchase perspective or an ordering perspective, right? Because NCI handles the on-prem, and NCM handles some of the public cloud functionality. Now, in terms of Cisco Compute HyperConverged with Nutanix, we support multiple node types, hypervisor options, and physical nodes. So for node types, we have three. We have the HyperConverged infrastructure node, which includes everything. It has CPU, it has RAM, it has disk. Then we have the storage-only node. And of course, if it's a computer, it's got CPU and RAM in it, but that's not the focus of the storage node. The focus is on making sure that there's lots and lots of disk in that node type. Then we have the compute-only node, and this is the opposite, right? It's a computer, so of course it has CPU and RAM, but the focus here is on making sure that we can pack in as much CPU and as much RAM to that node as possible with little or even no disk installed at all. I believe in our HyperFlex solution, we only supported the HCI and compute node types, so we've got a bit of additional flexibility here. And then from a hypervisor perspective, it's, I mentioned that we support three, but Nutanix really wants customers to pick between AHV and ESXi. Again, Hyper-V may be supported, but undesirable. We'll have to get some more information from Nutanix on this. So on this slide, please choose from AHV or ESXi, and we can see the minimum and maximum number of nodes per cluster supported there. So if you want the largest cluster possible, you may want to go with ESXi. If you want, there was some indication that certain features, maybe performance, not in a significant way on the performance side, but more so on the feature side. You'll have a more robust set of features with AHV than you will ESXi. That being said, ESXi still provides a lot of useful features for customers. Now, clusters support mixed node types and mixed drive types. There's really no restrictions here. So this is where I was saying that some of that less flexibility of hardware in a hyper-converged infrastructure solution was maybe one of the cons that we offered up. Here we're sort of saying not everything is supported, but we support multiple node types, we support lots of drive types, so we feel that there are lesser number of restrictions in this solution than there were in the HyperFlex solution. The underlying hardware that's currently supported includes the C220 M6 All Flash, the C220 M6 All NVMe, and the C240 M6 All Flash. And it says here with a maximum raw capacity of 182 terabytes per node. So if you think of the typical small business that I mentioned a bit earlier, in that context, we can build quite large clusters in terms of storage support with only a few nodes. All right. In terms of lifecycle management, this has to do with installing, expanding, and upgrading your clusters. For cluster installation, we have the Nutanix Foundation VM, which we had something similar for HyperFlex, and it basically bootstraps your cluster, gets everything installed to make it operational. For cluster expansion and upgrade, that's where we have Nutanix Prism and or Nutanix Central, depending on the size of your deployment. So the take-home message here is that you'll only need Foundation VM for installation. For all other management tasks, you're going to use Nutanix Prism or Nutanix Central. And as we also discussed previously, the underlying network is critical to the proper functioning of any hyperconverged solution where disk is distributed across multiple nodes that all communicate with each other across the network. As such, we want to make sure that we de-risk the network setup and configuration as much as possible with end-to-end automation. That's part of what comes with the Nutanix solution. So with automation, you get speed, you get consistency, you get best practices. Most importantly, you get overall better outcomes than when configuring the underlying network by hand. Okay, and we also mentioned the intent of having Cisco Intersight provide some management of nodes in the Nutanix cluster. So this will provide features like KVM and cross-launch into UCS Manager. But there's also additional features that Intersight SaaS or connected virtual appliance deployment modes will provide access to, such as connected TAC, auto RMA, hardware compatibility list, advisories, and alerting, all features that you should already be familiar with that come with Intersight. So keep that in mind. Now, this here is a really great animated slide that tries to highlight the differences between VMware Cloud Foundation architecture and Nutanix Cloud Platform architecture. The main takeaway that you'll notice here is that Nutanix offers similar functionality but with far fewer components. If you consider that each component needs to be installed, configured, secured, upgraded, and maintained over time, then the fewer components you have, the less burden and risk you have, the more streamlined your operations will be. So with VMware Cloud Foundation architecture in the lower left, the only hypervisor option you have is vSphere, but with Nutanix, we can offer support for AHV, vSphere, or Hyper-V, again, Hyper-V being the least preferred. Above that, we see vSAN and cloud and PowerFlex options. This can all be replaced with AOS. NSX can be replaced with Nutanix Flow. Obviously, AOS and Flow are other components that I haven't mentioned in the previous portions of the presentation, so feel free to look those up. In the upper left, we have vCenter for management. That would be replaced by Prism Central. We then have a number of different management components, including vRealize Operations, vRealize Automation, and Cloud Health. All of these can be replaced with Nutanix Cloud Management. And then on the lower right, we have all of the public cloud providers, right? We have VMware on AWS, Azure, Google, Oracle, or Alibaba. So we can replace all of that with NC2. Currently, that supports AWS and Azure with GCP support coming soon. I'm not aware of anything for Oracle or Alibaba at this time. Okay, so altogether, the idea here is that this represents the high-level Nutanix cloud platform architecture, how we have replaced all of the VMware Cloud Foundations architecture with a fewer number of components. And then, of course, we have the additional capabilities of Nutanix, including data governance, Nutanix files and objects, Nutanix data services for Kubernetes, Nutanix database service, as well as Project Beacon, which again is the extension of the Nutanix platform to support open source solutions like Kafka and Elasticsearch and Redis. Okay, this is another slide which sort of demonstrates a similar message. Down the middle, you'll see a list of platform capabilities. On the left, you'll see the VMware components needed to deliver those capabilities. On the right, you'll see the Nutanix components needed to deliver those same capabilities. And you can see that with Nutanix, you have less components and therefore more streamlined operations as mentioned on the previous slide. All right, so now we're going to get into a bit of migration strategies and product roadmap. Obviously, we want to help our HyperFlex customers, but remember that HyperFlex customers don't necessarily have to migrate today. So, and I want to say this with emphasis, depending on which family of underlying compute nodes an existing HyperFlex cluster is based on, customers may have the ability to ride out their existing hardware and software up until end of support in 2029, which means there's no rush for customers to decide today if they want to migrate off of HyperFlex, but we will present options. Okay, so if you are an older HyperFlex customer running on M4 node hardware, then you can continue running HyperFlex until hardware end of support, which is February 29th, 2024. We are 3 short months away from this, and this is based on end of life already announced for our M4 platform. So these customers we should be talking to today for sure. If they want to migrate, then we should be leading with M6 hardware, or M7 is in the roadmap and support should be coming soon. When that happens, we definitely want to lead with M7 just so customers can get the longest life out of their newest investments. For HyperFlex customers running M5 node hardware, those customers can continue running HyperFlex until end of hardware support, which is October 31st, 2028, which is 5 years from now and 4 years more than the M4. However, there is a caveat. They must have already purchased the HyperFlex software by September 2024. Okay, so in the case they want to migrate, again, we should be leading with M6 hardware or M7 when it comes available. For HyperFlex customers running M6 node hardware, these are the customers that most recently invested in HyperFlex. These customers can continue running HyperFlex until end of M6 hardware support, which is February 28th, 2029. So that's 6 years from now, roughly 6 years from now, 5 years more than the M4. And so we want to give these customers a really long runway to leverage their existing investment before they have to migrate. In certain use cases, they may want to migrate anyway. If that's the case, again, we should be leading with M6 hardware today or M7 hardware as soon as it comes available. And if customers want to move from HyperFlex to Nutanix software, then we just need to validate the exact BOM for the hardware is compatible. This has mostly to do with drives that may not be supported in, that may be supported by HyperFlex software, but not Nutanix software today. So checking BOM compatibility will just help ensure a smooth transition. In this case, you'll have to do a multi-part migration, but we'll talk about migration strategies here on the next slide. So if you want to purchase a net new Nutanix cluster, then you can do that. You can build it, and then you can just migrate using vMotion. This is what vSphere admins do all day, every day, and this is the easiest, least risky option. If you want to repurpose an existing HyperFlex cluster from using HyperFlex software to using Nutanix software, then as I started to mention on the previous slide, you'll have to validate BOM compatibility, but you'll also have to do a multi-step migration, meaning you'll need to migrate data off of the HyperFlex cluster, then you'll need to rebuild the HyperFlex cluster using Nutanix software, so now it's a Nutanix cluster, and then you'll want to migrate your data back onto the Nutanix cluster. Finally, if you want to migrate your hypervisor from ESXi to AHV, there is a process for this as well. Okay, so methods that can be used for migration, each with their own pros and cons. So vMotion, we already mentioned, this is the easiest. It requires no downtime. Nutanix Move tool can assist with the hypervisor migration that I mentioned. And then you've also got Veeam and Cohesity, which can assist with data backup and restore if you're entertaining a migration that involves repurposing an existing HyperFlex cluster. Okay, of course, there are also multiple professional service options available for customers. Customers can do the work themselves, or they can engage a partner professional services. They can engage Nutanix professional services. They can engage Cisco professional services. These offerings address different customer migration use cases and complexity levels, with recommendations about which services should be positioned based on these factors. So that's how this slide should be used, is to determine which professional services should be engaged depending on the type of migration and complexity that you're looking to undertake with your customer. Okay, so in terms of roadmap, we are currently in Q2 of fiscal year 24, shown in the middle. The most immediate and significant piece of the roadmap is to add support for M7 hardware, both the C220 and C240 blades. I shouldn't call them C220 and 240. They're not, my mistake. No, they are. I'm sorry. C220 and C240, but those aren't blades. Those are standalone servers. In addition to this, we'll also be adding support for edge locations, which are typically standalone, meaning because they're remote, they might be a small branch office, they do not have fabric interconnects as part of their topology. And you may recall this being called DC no FI, with the ability to support that type of remote HyperFlex cluster managed by Intersight. So that's something that's coming in the roadmap. Also, UCS Manager will be given priority for management capabilities because more customers still use UCSM today than IMM, but IMM support is under consideration and likely for Q3 fiscal year 24, as shown on the far right. The rest of this slide really talks about enabling hardware compatibility with Nutanix software. From an Intersight perspective, I've highlighted the two boxes on the right here. There are several integrated management features coming in either Q2 or Q3 of fiscal year 24. First will be features that are geared towards lifecycle management of Intersight standalone mode managed clusters. So again, this has to do with those edge use cases where you have a DC with no FI type topology at a branch office location managed via Intersight. Then features geared towards lifecycle management of UCSM managed clusters, and then features geared towards lifecycle management of IMM managed clusters. In all cases, lifecycle management has to do with cluster expansion and upgrades of each of those types of clusters. All right, from an ordering perspective, I've provided links to a number of documents at the top of this slide, the first being the Nutanix M6 ordering guide. There will be a Nutanix M7 ordering guide when M7 comes available. There's another link which provides a nice summary of the hyperconverged infrastructure product IDs needed for this solution. And then we have a CCW step-by-step walkthrough of the ordering process. That process begins with high-level SKU HCI-M6-MLB, and when M7 comes available, you'll replace the M6 with the M7. Once you configure that high-level SKU, you'll configure it, and inside that you will configure the desired rack server, the Fabric Interconnect, Nutanix software and professional services, as well as Intersight. From a Nutanix software options perspective, the high-level SKU begins with NTX-SW, and then there's multiple options depending on what it is you're trying to achieve, on-prem, in the cloud, etc. So you have NCI or NCI-D with data services. You've got NCM, which is with cloud management. You have NCP, which is the combination of NCI and NCM. And you also have EUC, which is end user compute. Nutanix software supports multiple license tiers and support tiers. So the 3 license tiers are Starter, Professional, and Ultimate, and the 2 support tiers are Production and Mission Critical. If you're already familiar with Nutanix, then you should already be familiar with the license tiers. If you need more information from me, feel free to reach out. I'm going to have to dig into this a bit more. I haven't yet. From a support tiers perspective, I believe the difference between Production and Mission Critical is that Mission Critical will get you responses from Nutanix in half the time. Another thing I want to mention about support here is that you should open your case through Cisco TAC. We are integrated with Nutanix on the back end, so opening a case through TAC will also open a corresponding case in Nutanix's systems, and all of the data is shared back and forth. If you open a support case with Nutanix, the opposite is not true. So there is no reverse integration with Cisco TAC or data sharing. So please open up your support cases through Cisco TAC. And then finally, there's various Nutanix professional services options, the high-level SKU there being NTX-SW-PS. And there's multiple offerings here, including design, deployment, and various workshops. Okay, and this slide I just wanted to throw up. This is based on research performed by IDC. The purpose is a total cost of ownership report proving the value of Nutanix. There's, I think, a number of interesting data points here. Reduced total cost of operations by 43%, reduced total infrastructure cost by 36%, 12 months to payback. Anyway, a 97% reduction in unplanned downtime. Anyway, a number of interesting data points that I thought were worth your taking a look at. Okay, what now? So I'm going to start in the upper right corner of this slide. It says collateral can be viewed on Sales Center. I believe that should say Sales Connect, so I probably need to correct that. If you go on Sales Connect and search Nutanix, there's a lot of Nutanix collateral available already and more appearing there. I wouldn't say daily, but very frequently. Start to enable yourself using Black Belt Academy. There's going to be new learning maps coming there soon for Nutanix, so be sure to check that out. In addition, I already mentioned earlier in the presentation, dCloud. I imagine there may be some lab capabilities in dCloud that are coming soon, as well as Nutanix University. And then be sure to check out the Partner Quick Guide and FAQ to help answer your questions. Additional resources I put over on the left. I'm not sure whether these are accessible external to Cisco, but feel free to give them a try, and if not, you can always reach out to me. So you've got a WebEx Teams room there that you can join, and then mailers. Again, if those aren't externally available, you send your questions there and you get a bounce, then feel free to forward those questions to me, and I'll hunt down the responses for you. Finally, some additional resources and next steps, some of which have already been mentioned. We've got the Partner Quick Reference Guide. That's always a great place to start. Cisco Black Belt and Nutanix University for enablement. There's a couple of tools that are relevant to Nutanix. We've got the UCS Sizer and the Nutanix Sizer. We also have the Cisco and Nutanix Solution Ordering Guide, which I think I linked to on that ordering at the top of that ordering slide, the red slide. The next bullet point says M5 HyperFlex Demo Lab conversion. So what this means is if you're a partner that has an M5 HyperFlex all-flash cluster in your lab today, then there's an opportunity via an upcoming Nutanix software update to repurpose that cluster to run Nutanix software. And the point of that would be to demonstrate the high-level UCS with Nutanix solution. It's not going to support all features. It's not an environment that is appropriate for performance testing on behalf of your customers. And Nutanix will not be supported on M5 in production, only in the lab. So again, the point here is just to give partners that already have some hardware the capability of demoing the solution in their lab. Of course, they would also be able to invest in M6 or M7 when it's ready to be able to demo the full solution, right? And those will be supported in production. And then finally, instructor-led training or boot camps. If you're on my mailing list, I recently sent out registration information for instructor-led training that is available in Q2 fiscal year 24. So basically through the end of January, due to the holidays and end of year shutdown at Cisco, we tend to run most Q2 instructor-led training and boot camps in January. So please get registered for those that are available as soon as possible. I know that Nutanix specific boot camps are going to be run in greater numbers starting in Q3 fiscal year 24. So basically starting in February. All right, so I hope this was a good introduction to Nutanix. I hope that you find the material within useful and can be used as a good reference in conversations with your customers. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out as always. And thank you for taking the time to listen. Have a great day.